Good afternoon, News24 friends, and welcome to our latest episode of News24 Frontline Coalition Nation Edition. I'm happy to have you here today with us as we discuss this unfolding historic moment in South Africa's political history. Really the emergence of a new democracy for us as a country. I'm joined today on this webinar by my colleagues. Natasha Marrian is our politics editor. She's assistant editor for Politics and Opinion. Carol Paton is our writer at large, as well as Mpumelelo Mkhabela, our political analyst and News24 columnist. My colleagues and I haven't slept much for the past week, so if we look a bit tired, we are. And we were up late last night to listen to President Cyril Ramaphosa making that statement at the end of a very long ANC-NEC meeting in Boksburg. All eyes were on Boksburg yesterday to see what the ANC would do as we enter day 5 out of 14 for our political parties to form a government in the middle of June. So my name is Adriaan Basson, editor-in-chief of News24. And as you would have seen this morning on News24, President Ramaphosa announced a government of national unity idea, really, last night. The ANC would like to do this. There's no guarantee yet that this will happen. But I will unpack what this means with my colleagues in the next hour. I would also like to encourage you to ask us questions. There's a Q&A button on your screen. Please post your questions for us. Keep them short, keep them succinct, and we will try to get to as many of them as possible in the Q&A box. So we are, like I said, we are on day 5 out of 14. The Constitution says a president must be elected 14 days after the declaration of the election results, which was on Sunday. We are now on day 5. There's another 9 days to go before we reach that point. The ANC, as you know by now, ended on 40% of the national vote. They remain the largest party in the country, followed by the DA just below 22%, Jacob Zuma's Umkhonto weSizwe party on 14%, and the EFF down to 9% from the 10% they got in the previous national election. Natasha Marrian, if I can start with you. Did you see last night's announcement coming? Did you see a government of national unity taking our memories back to 1994 with former President Nelson Mandela inviting the National Party and the IFP again into his cabinet? Did you see that decision coming? Natasha, I think you are still on mute. There you go.
Sorry about that. Adriaan, thanks. I think it was the cleverest way to move forward for President Cyril Ramaphosa and the ANC, because it is an all-encompassing thing, and we don't really know the details as yet. So the questions that we had going into the ANC-NEC meeting have not really been answered. Does the ANC prefer a full-blown tie-up with the EFF, with the MK party versus a tie-up with the DA? So the devil will be in the details. A government of national unity right now is just this amorphous term saying we're going to speak to everyone and we're going to bring everyone in. How that's going to actually work in real terms, we still don't know.
Carol Paton, you've seen a lot over the past 30 years as a journalist, as a working journalist. Did the GNU surprise you? Carol, you must just unmute yourself. Like I said, we all had very little sleep.
Please sorry, we're not used to this. By the time the announcement was made, I think the signals were really pretty clear from the day before that was the way it was going to go. There was some discussion. I mean, I remember way before, we even held the election, there was some discussion about a GNU, and there wasn't much of you couldn't actually draw the ANC on that at all, because their attitude was, well, we're going to win the election. So no, not back then. Back then it seemed like no appetite, but clearly the situation is different, and I agree. Good solution for the ANC, because because to choose sort of one of the bigger, it would have had to have chosen one of the bigger parties, either the DA or the EFF plus the PA. And that was not a good choice because it was so divisive in the ANC and also would have been divisive in the electorate.
Mpumelelo Mkhabela, what exactly is a GNU, a government of national unity? It is a term that we all have to become accustomed to very, very quickly. If you Google the phrase, there's a lot of definitions, dictionary definitions. But in our context, in our South African context, and President Ramaphosa, if I can just read you some of his speech last night, which was delivered just after around 10:30, he said, in establishing a government of national unity, we would be building on a rich history of cooperation across divides of politics and ideology. We would be drawing on an experience with which South Africans are familiar and which served our country well at a time of great difficulty and division. 30 years after the achievement of democracy in 1994, we are once again called upon as political parties to come together to forge a common future for our country. This is a very 94 Rainbow Nation-ish speech, Mpumelelo Mkhabela. What did you make of it, and what exactly is a GNU?
Thanks, Adriaan. I think if we follow President Ramaphosa's speech last night and take a cue from the government of national unity of President Nelson Mandela from 94 to 1999, it means then that there's an acceptance that the country is fractured, the country is divided, and therefore it requires a government of national unity to unify it, because that's exactly what was the imperative in 1994. South Africa had just emerged from a deeply divided past, and the different parties had just hammered an agreement on a new future based on a new constitution, which still had to be finalized. And part of the transitional arrangement was that the new government, the so-called transitional government, would be a government composed of people who were previously enemies. The Liberation Movement, which had just won the election in 1994, as well as the National Party, which was a part of apartheid, and as well as other parties that would meet the requirement to participate in the GNU. But there are differences. The difference is that at that time, the ANC was, when the deal was hammered before the 1994 elections, it was expected the ANC would win the elections with a landslide. And that's what happened. They got more than 60% of the vote. This time around, the ANC is down 40%. It's now got 40% of the vote. So it's bound to be a totally different GNU. The other difference, of course, is that at the time that GNU was legalized, it was constitutionally mandated government of national unity. That was meant basically to make sure that everyone who feared a democratic majority, their interests will be guaranteed, and the new government will settle in. They had no experience. They will settle in, and everyone will be reassured that their interests and their aspirations are taken care of. This time around, if there's a government of national unity, it would not be legislated. It will basically be purely voluntary arrangement. Back then, it was both mandated and voluntary in a sense that parties that were willing to participate in it could join it, but they were not obliged. But once they join, they had to follow certain rules of the GNU, but they can still opt out. But opting out at that time had no implications for the running of government because the ANC had the majority. This time around, not only is this not legislated, it would everything has to be voluntary. It has to be a voluntarily arranged deal. So people could opt out of it. But if they do opt out, there are consequences in this case because the ANC doesn't have a majority. So down the line, there are always risks that the government could be collapsed. But back then, the government could not be collapsed. So in summary, those are the key differentiating factors and similarities.
Natasha Marrian, this is a very big difference, right, from the 1994 GNU. Is that in that case it was Madiba trying to do something symbolic by inviting his foes in the National Party and in Inkatha Freedom Party to the cabinet. This time the ANC literally needs the votes to have Ramaphosa re-elected president in 9 days from now, maximum 9 days from now. That is quite a big change. I mean, the ANC needs 10 plus 1% support to have Ramaphosa elected when they nominate him in Parliament. And we've all been using our calculators on our phones frantically over the past few days. But there's only a very limited few options that brings you to that magical 50 plus 1, Natasha.
There is. There's very few options. And for me, Adriaan, I think the GNU is an attempt more by the ANC to manage its own internal contradictions and it's the internal dissent inside the party over choosing one partner over another. It's the most palatable solution across the factional line. And I think that's the difference this time around. It's driven by self-interest. It's driven by an attempt to manage internal dynamics. It's driven by an attempt to manage perceptions among their support base that they're not selling out and going into a coalition, a full-out coalition with the DA, or on the other hand, going into a coalition with the EFF. For me, it's an attempt to manage those dynamics. What I find interesting as well is that the EFF and the MK party are dead set against any sort of DA tie-up. Julius Malema, the leader of the EFF, did say on Twitter last night or on X last night, that they wouldn't go into an agreement with the enemy. But interestingly enough, MK and the EFF and other small political parties would also need the DA if they were to form any sort of alliance or any sort of coalition to push the ANC out and to win a majority. So, a GNU is actually the only option open, to parties wanting to maintain their internal base, to the ANC wanting to maintain its internal base while also, keeping its leadership structure united in the face of this election loss. So for me, this time around, it's about self-interest, it's about managing internal dynamics, and it's about, finding the most workable solution going forward, but one that doesn't split the party down the middle internally as well.
Natasha, if I can just stay with you for a moment, there's been some diverse comments this morning in reaction to Ramaphosa's announcement. On the one extreme, you have people who say it was a masterstroke. And on the other end, you have people who say, typical Ramaphosa, he didn't actually make any decision. He kicked the decision can down the line. And it's now up to the other parties to decide whether they're in or out. Where do you stand on this spectrum?
Well, Adriaan, the devil's in the detail, right? So, and we have no details. So we know that it's all up for negotiation. It's all going to depend on what the ANC puts on the table with coalition potential participants in this GNU and how they respond to that. So I don't think the ANC had much of an option. It could have come out very clearly and said, well, we want a GNU with the EFF and MK, but it then might have gone into meetings with them and not gotten the buy-in. So it is a little bit of, kicking the can down the road, but did they have much of a choice when they haven't had a full-blown negotiation with any of the parties? I don't think so. So I think this was probably the most workable solution going forward. But like I said earlier, the devil is going to be in the detail. What exactly does that GNU look like? What are the elements of it? Who are the parties involved, and what are the trade-offs between them?
Carol, Paton, do you think President Ramaphosa has a clear idea in his mind what he wants? Do you think he knows exactly who he wants in his cabinet, how he wants this arrangement to work, and that he's just using kind of fancy words and terms and buying some time to get what he ultimately wants?
No, I don't actually think so. This isn't the outcome they wanted. It isn't the outcome he wanted. So I think he's trying to go for Plan B. So and I don't think Plan B, as Natasha's saying, Plan B is not fully developed by anyone. So at this stage, we don't even know. We know the ANC wants a GNU, but we don't know if any of the other parties are going to say yes. We've had a hint from EFF saying we're not working with the enemy. The DA in the past, well, prior to this moment, said we have a red line. We won't work with the EFF, the PA, or MK. And so it's still up in the air as to who's going to come in and who isn't. And that's exactly what the ANC did say yesterday. They said, well, let's put it out there and let's see who's going to walk this next mile with us.
But Mpumelelo, Mkhabela, I mean, this whole thing can actually work itself out through a process of elimination. Isn't that the case? Didn't Ramaphosa last night put enough cards on the table to ensure a party like the MKP doesn't stay in this arrangement? I mean, if we looked at Ramaphosa's speech last night, he spoke about things they have to agree on, things like the constitution, things like non-racialism, non-sexism, the rule of law. Doesn't Ramaphosa and the ANC maybe think that if they put up these rules of engagement or principles that they can get rid of some of their own red line options?
Well, I don't think so. He appears to me to be very accommodative. If you recall his speech at the IEC's results center at the Rock in Pretoria, where the results were declared, he actually mentioned that he would like a situation where political parties set aside their differences and undermine their differences, and then find a common ground. And then he spoke about how there is a need to forge a future around the constitution and around the rule of law. So it appears to me when he spoke last night, he had secured at least those major outlines of a deal that features what he prefers. The rule of law, the constitution, non-racialism, non-sexism, all of those things are not necessarily new. There are things that are already in the constitution. They are the founding provisions of the constitution. You cannot change that. So for him to mention them last night, I see it as just an overemphasis, just to emphasize what is required to do a deal. And that a deal must not be about unraveling the foundations of the country. It must be about helping to implement those foundations and let people realize that actually these foundations are something tangible for them. They've got something to gain from them. So I think that based on that, he is, and of course, he also mentioned last night that the elections were toxic. The campaign was toxic. And I think he's referring to this type of divisive campaigns that focused on identity politics, that focused on people campaigning against the constitution itself, and having actually asked political parties to accommodate their differences and undermine them. He actually is trying to see if the political parties can actually reset themselves in a context where they are being forced by the constitution or by the results, as he put it, to work together. So can the political parties now set aside their ideological differences for the sake of the country, as he says? Can they use the constitution as a basis for that? Can the MK party, for example, cease to campaign against the constitution for the sake of participating in this government of national unity? They can revive that campaign against the constitution, maybe in the next election, because in any event, they don't have a platform to campaign against the constitution anymore. You can stand up in parliament and talk against it until forever, because you don't have powers to change the constitution. No one can change the constitution now. So what's the point of campaigning against it? So they may as well use it as a foundation to form this government of national unity. Use the values that are in the constitution to do it. So I can't find fault in what the president said at the declaration of the results and what he said yesterday. However, I want to go back to what Natasha said about the details not being clear. Even the president himself said that the ANC is approaching these different political parties with an open mind. But it's clear that the open mind has got limits. The outline has been put together. There are things that are not non-negotiable. The constitution is non-negotiable. So what needs to be negotiated, in my view, are the terms of participating in government. What kind of working arrangement will they have? And he says it must be public, and the public must be aware of it. What kind of agreement can be hammered and be made public so that all the supporters of the different political parties know what the people they voted for are signing up to? And then what kind of accountability mechanisms can be developed around ensuring that everyone plays their part in respecting the rules of engagement? And what kind of dispute resolution mechanisms can be established around the working of the government? So that's the detail that is yet to come. And I think it's good the ANC didn't put all those details up front. Otherwise, it will make the negotiations look like it's a foregone conclusion, and other parties would feel like, but you're already imposing things on us. So I think it's good that the ANC put the outline, but everyone must now participate in shaping the content within which the outline is been put.
Natasha, we've been talking about the realignment of our politics for at least 2 decades. I think Helen Zille was one of the first people who spoke about it probably 10, 15 years ago. Isn't this what we are living here? Aren't we seeing the realignment of our politics, where someone like Ramaphosa is trying to bring the center together through using the constitution, by saying those of us, let's start there. Those of us who believe in our founding document and all the values entrenched in our constitution, they are the ones that we want as part of this GNU, which may leave outside those in the extreme identity politics that has developed in this election. I mean, the only 2 parties who really grew in this election were the MK Party and the Patriotic Alliance, who are really both founded on strong identity politics. I mean, isn't this the beginning of an emergence of a stronger center, then mainly through the ANC and the DA coming together, but also a party like the IFP?
I think it is, Peter, but sorry, Adriaan. I'm really tired as well. I think it is definitely a coming together, or sort of a move toward the center. But how it's managed from now on, I think, is crucial to whether this center wins out, or whether the parties espousing identity politics, who are anti the constitution. It is now up to President Ramaphosa and the government that eventually emerges to determine whether that center holds. I think it's the beginning, but it's also a crucial moment in drawing a real line in the sand between the kind of politics espoused by MK and the Patriotic Alliance, and to a degree the EFF as well, and the center and the constitutionalists. The choice the ANC has is between democracy and kleptocracy. I think you were the one who first wrote that, and it's so true. And the choice that they face in terms of its coalition partners is between non-racialism and nationalism. So the ANC has been placed in exactly that position by the electorate. But how they handle this and what the government going forward that they form going forward does is going to be crucial to determine whether that center holds and whether that center re-emerges as the dominant view in the country. So many of our people feel marginalized, feel isolated, feel like they're on the fringes, and that's why people are vacillating toward or sort of aligning themselves with these parties that are speaking very loudly in favor of those that are marginalized. So it is absolutely the beginning, but it has to hold, and it has to actually have an impact going forward. Otherwise, those fringe views are going to become more and more the center.
Carol, Paton, we do have insights into the DA's response or initial response to this request for GNU. So News24 this morning managed to obtain a framework for multi-party government, a 3 or 2.5 page document that the DA wrote that will accompany them to their negotiations with the ANC. We understand that DA leadership met with the ANC this morning or are meeting with them at the moment. Carol, you've had a moment to look at this document. I mean, suffice to say, it is quite moderate. It is nothing like the DA's campaign, which was quite an aggressive campaign. The president didn't mention there, but referred to toxic campaigns for the election. What do you make of the DA's approach? And maybe first tell our viewers just the broad outlines of what the DA suggests Adriaan you could look like.
Right. So they've said, we've also got, just like President Ramaphosa said, they've got a framework. They've also got a framework. Theirs is a bit more detailed. So the first principle is the Constitution. And the Bill of Rights, and I think there's a hint there at the property clause saying the Bill of Rights in its entirety, including the property clause which the EFF have tried to change. An effective and corruption-free public service, that's difficult because it's difficult to achieve, and they talk about in the document, they talk about banning cadre deployment, which we know the ANC do not want to do. Sustainable fiscal framework and economic policy. This is where there are a lot of similarities. In fact, almost everything on the list that the DA says are economic policies that they would like to see. The continuation of Operation Vulindlela, the unbundling of Eskom, the concessioning of ports, the establishment of a water regulator, all of these things which have been a liberalization of the market and allowing the private sector in. Those are all listed in their document, and they're all actually ANC policies. So too are the fiscal policies. And then I think importantly for the DA, they put in one which I think really matters a lot to them, and that is the devolution of transport, passenger transport, and policing to the provinces, because I think, the provincial government and the city of Cape Town are very frustrated that they can't get the rail working here because actually they don't have the power. So that's a big one for them, and that will be really helpful if they get it. It will be a great experiment. Yeah.
Carol, the one that we didn't talk about is cadre deployment, and the DA's, well, I guess insistence is not the right word, but they pitch that cadre deployment is outlawed. I mean, when I look at the document, everything seems so palatable for the ANC except that one.
Yeah, that's a kind of, the ANC don't want to tell their activist base, we're going to do this. And also, it's a difficult one as well. I think the other suggestion around the public service, how do you make it better, is to give the Public Service Commission a really independent ability to actually exercise oversight on the public service, because there's no doubt that one of the reasons we're in the mess we're in and the state has lost so much capacity is through bad appointments. So it's pretty crucial, and possibly not so. I know the bill that the DA have got a bill to ban cadre deployment. I can't see that. Getting passed. But yeah, so cadre deployment I think is going to be a tricky one. But I think all the others are fine. I think it's very notable that the other things that are real red lines for the ANC, like Black economic empowerment, affirmative action, employment equity, public procurement, the public procurement bill, preferential procurement, those things which are all very, very close to the ANC's heart and their constituency, the DA hasn't raised. And I think that's very mature of them, because they have been a central part of their campaign.
Carol, I've been impressed with the maturity. We always said that when we get to this point of coalitions, and very few of us, let's just put it out there, very few of us saw the ANC coming in on 40 or just below 40. I had them in the low 40s, but never at 40. But Carol, we always said, and we knew that when we come to a day of coalition formation, you're going to have adults in the room. You're going to have mature conversations. And you wrote in one of your columns this week around Fikile Mbalula, for example, who has been extremely mature in his comments post the election result. Do you see the same kind of maturity in this speech from the DA, almost to the point where it seems like they want to make this deal work?
Yeah, I am definitely seeing that from both the ANC and the DA, and it's impressive because it's such a delicate, sensitive time, and you don't want to blow up this deal before you've even got to properly talking about it. So yeah, it's impressive. I think the EFF's maturity has been a lot less impressive because, you know, Julius's one tweet last night to say, no, you know, this is all, we won't work with the enemy. Not a very mature response, not a very considered response. But yeah, that is the EFF.
Carol, I just want to stay with you for a moment and talk about the DA. So many of our users and our readers doesn't quite understand why it's so difficult for some people in the ANC to envisage a DA deal, and why President Ramaphosa couldn't just announce a coalition with the DA and the IFP, for that matter, who they need in KwaZulu-Natal. I mean, why is that? Why is it still hard for some people in the ANC? And I'm not talking about that crowd of, I think it was 12 who protested outside the hotel where the NEC was meeting yesterday. I'm talking about kind of moderate, middle of the road, centrist, democracy-loving, constitution-obeying ANC members. Why is the DA a tough sell for them?
Look, you know, the problem is the DA is viewed by many people as being a party that protects white privilege or minority privilege, and there's this very quick step from, you know, some of the things they campaign around. Let's say, you know, anti-Black economic empowerment, anti-employment equity, those sorts of things. There's a for many voters, there's a very short step that we have to take from opposition to that to opposition to Black people. You don't want Black people to succeed, and I think that those are really tricky issues that the DA is going to have to grapple with how it projects those, because they are in the interests of Black people in general, and they are in the interests of transformation. So I think that's really one of the issues. And then also, obviously, there's the issue of the fact that, you know, the DA effectively swallowed up the old National Party. And so they've got the remnants of the National Party of 1948 in their ranks. And I think these things are very hard to shake. And I think that often white South Africans don't appreciate the pain that is attached to the past, and how difficult it is to actually be magnanimous and forgiving in this kind of environment.
And of course, having said that, the DA was not the party of apartheid. I mean, the DA was born out of the Progressive Party and the Democratic Party, and the ANC, in fact, you know, those last standing members of the National Party became ANC members. So there's that fact as well. But point well taken, Natasha. Just want to bring you in on that point. I mean, does it make any sense for the DA at this moment to even enter that debate, to try and convince people that they are not a racist party that protects white interests only? I mean, it's impossible that only white people voted for them. If you looked at their voter turnout, they did better than in 2019. I mean, is that something that will even be mentioned at the negotiation tables, you think?
I don't think it's something that will be mentioned at the negotiating table because, but I do think that that's something the DA is going to have to grapple with going forward. If the DA wants to grow into a party that could potentially lead the country on its own in the future, it's got to start grappling with that. It can't have a sort of, echo chamber around it constantly, telling it that it's the only party that espouses non-racialism, when when most South Africans on the other side do actually view the party as protecting minority interests. So I think that's a conversation that the DA is going to have internally. That it's a conversation that the DA is going to have to grapple. It's something that the DA is going to have to grapple with going forward, and perhaps in working as part of a broader collective. The DA can emerge from its echo chamber, its former leader Helen Zille and the federal executive chairwoman constantly says that the DA is the only party that espouses non-racialism, but that from the outside, that's not the perception of the DA. It is still seen by the majority of South Africans as a party protecting privilege. So that issue won't necessarily make it to the negotiating table, but it is a strategy and a tactical question that the DA is going to have to ask itself going forward in order, if it does still have ambitions to govern the country by itself.
Natasha, just staying on that point, we have a question from our subscriber Kathleen Rogan. So Kathleen's asking, so many complaints regarding coalition regard fear that involvement with the DA will mean the return to apartheid. The DA has never supported apartheid. How do we get rid of this perception? I guess that speaks to what you've just mentioned. How does the DA get rid of the perception? I mean, how do you change that?
It's got to start having the hard conversations, Adriaan. The difficult conversations inside the DA itself. There's many people support the DA, and many have been discussing how the DA actually accomplishes this. And one of the real suggestions is that the DA needs to have a leadership come in with fresh eyes, a leadership that hasn't been burned by previous election cycles, that hasn't been through election cycles where the DA did the most to sort of grow its support among Black communities and failed to do so. It needs leadership, a new, fresh leadership to take it forward into the future. And incidentally, the DA comes up for a national conference, I think it's next year, where it will be looking at a leadership question. And I think that would be an opportune time for the DA to actually, look at questions like this and how it can once and for all begin changing that perception. And perhaps the moderate position it's taking in going into these negotiations with the ANC is a start, and is a step toward undoing the perception that it's a party that wants the return of apartheid.
Mpumelelo, if I can just stick to the theme with you for a moment. Someone sent me a screenshot the other day of the 1994 election result where the ANC got almost 65% and the National Party almost 20%. And they said to me, look, 30 years down the line, we have the ANC plus its offshoots, the MK and the EFF, again on around 65%, and the DA on again around 20%. Have the country not moved on in 30 years to a point where people vote outside their lagers, where people vote outside their traditional parties? I mean, is that too much of a cynical view, would you say, or do we have a problem in this regard?
No, look, I think it was always expected that the genuine change in the political setup would come from what happens within the ANC. So you would have a situation where, for example, Bantu Holomisa was the first to break out of the ANC fighting about corruption, and the second breakout was Cope, whose supporters and founders protested the election of Jacob Zuma, whom they thought was an anathema to the constitutional setup. And then now we had Julius Malema and his group, and then now we have MK party. And each time there had been a breakaway grouping, the ANC suffered electorally, except after the formation of the UDM, and the ANC subsequently got a 2/3 majority in 2004. But that was the last time the ANC grew. I would say that was a peak for the ANC. So it's expected that if there's only going to be a major shakeup in the political system, it would have to come from the internal dynamics of the ANC, which could either weaken it or strengthen it. One breakout that has not yet happened, which I would have thought would have been much more significant and lasting, would have been a breakout from a genuine left of the ANC, as it happened, for example, say in Zimbabwe with the formation of MDC, which was formed by the labor movement led by Morgan Tsvangirai, or in Zambia, which was a breakaway which was formed by the Chiluba, which came from the labor movement. In South Africa, we're having different type of breakouts. The labor movement and the left, in the main, they claim allegiance to the ANC, even though NUMSA broke away. But generally, in principle, the labor movement still claim allegiance to the ANC, and the Communist Party, which historically was the non-racial component of the bigger liberation movement, still claims to be aligned with the ANC. There's no sign of a breakaway there. So we are having these different types of breakaways, with COPE breaking away as a way of preserving what they said the real ANC, which was a constitutionalist ANC, and MK breaking away for totally opposite, denouncing the constitution, totally opposite of COPE. All of them, they actually had substantive support. So, however, even though primarily realignment in South Africa will be driven by what happens in the ANC, there is no reason why the opposition is not gunning for growth. Why the DA remains a permanent official opposition at hovering at 20%, 21%, 22%. So clearly it speaks to the DA has to do a serious introspection. Why, for example, people break away from the ANC, don't join the DA en masse and make them the next optional government. So now they have to rely on the ANC's politics to actually break the ANC apart, and then hopefully then they can now get into a coalition government with either of the ANC factions. So it's a very big issue that the opposition needs to would need to think about. I don't think it's a cynical way of looking at it, as some people say. That's the reality of South African politics.
Natasha, I want to come back to the calculator. So the ANC on 40% needs 10 plus 1 to get into power. And what that literally means, just to explain to our viewers, is all new members of parliament will come down here to Cape Town in about a week from now, and there will be a big sitting at the Cape Town Convention Centre that will be the place, the venue for the first sitting of parliament. And there's going to be 400 MPs, and to become president, you need the majority in a vote. So it's a secret ballot. Not all of them have to be there. You just need to get the majority if there's a quorum, which is around 140, I believe. So a president will be elected, but let's assume all 400 members are there. They should be there at least. It's their first sitting. You're going to need 201 votes. So that's really what we're talking about. The ANC has 159 members of parliament. So they need, 62 people to vote with them. 42 people to vote with them. It is Friday and it's late. Natasha, what do we know? This is quite a lot of votes. This is really, you need the DA, you need the MK party or the EFF to work with you here. If you don't have any of those parties, you're in a spot of bother, because then you've got the IFP on 4%, and then you have to get all the rats and mouse parties, with all respect, to vote for you, which is going to be hard and messy, and probably something Ramaphosa doesn't want to do. So we've spoken about the DA and their position. What do we know so far about the MK party and their position on this GNU?
So the MK party's most recent iteration of its position is that it's willing to not talk to the ANC. But the MK party is still going ahead and contesting the outcome of the election. It still believes that it has won a 2/3 majority nationally and the KZN province outright, and we should see some court action there. Adriaan, I think from my perspective, I think the only real way forward is either the ANC work with the EFF and the Rats and Mice Party to get over the line in that initial vote, or the ANC and the DA work together to get over the line to elect both the Speaker and the President. So we have to make sure that they have to make sure that that agreement is in place before that crucial election. I think there's a race inside the ANC at least to try and secure that initial agreement before that very critical election takes place. The MK party and the EFF and a host of Rats and Mice parties would still need the DA to elect another president or an opposition president. So that's a long shot for those parties. But the most likely or the easiest shot to electing a president would be for the ANC and the DA to go together, or the ANC and the EFF and a couple, maybe even 2 or 3 Rats and Mice parties to come together.
Natasha, I want to stay with you and come to questions from our readers. So there's a reader called Max Diesel. I'm not sure if that's your real name, but it's a cool name. And I think he read your column yesterday, Natasha, because Max is asking, are there any possibilities of combining a GNU and a confidence and supply option for government?
Max, that was something actually spoken about by a few leaders that I spoke to on Thursday, saying that you could have involvement of opposition parties such as the EFF and the PA in government, in the executive, and then you have a separate agreement with the DA for Parliament, where you have a confidence and supply arrangement in exchange for certain parliamentary posts. I see in the DA's demands, they are demanding the Speaker position as well as the chairpersons of the portfolio committees. I don't think they will secure all of those positions, but that is certainly one of the options that's been looked at, a combination of both. I know and you can call that a government of national unity, where you're accommodating parties in the executive as well as parties in Parliament. So I think that is among the possibilities that could emerge. It depends on negotiations with the individual parties.
And then, Natasha, there's a question around from Indran, who's asking, is there still a risk of Ramaphosa being jettisoned and throwing the entire process back into chaos?
I don't think there is. In the very few insights I got from yesterday's meeting, that's not such a priority at the moment. It seems as if President Ramaphosa is safe for now, and the biggest push against President Ramaphosa now is coming from the outside. It's coming from the MK party, and it's coming potentially from the EFF. And I think the more former President Zuma's party pushes against President Ramaphosa, I think the more the ANC-NEC is going to rally around him. So I don't think there's a big risk of that happening. At least not in this negotiating period.
Can I add something about the risk? Yes. Very quickly. Sure. The only risk I see against Ramaphosa would emanate from the EFF's case in the Constitutional Court on Phala. Even though that case was filed before the elections, but the court has shown interest in hearing it. And should they rule against Ramaphosa, they are more likely to say Parliament failed in its duty to do an investigation on the Ngcobo report. So therefore, Parliament must do the investigation. So if that happens, it would bring Ramaphosa back to his original position of wanting to leave if there was going to be an investigation in Parliament against him. However, the risk, as Natasha says, is not immediate, because there's still going to be hearing, there's still going to be judgment, and that may take months to come. In the meantime, perhaps the government will be set up and it will have a firm footing, except that if some of the parties like the DA, they can only participate in a GNU led by Ramaphosa, and suddenly Ramaphosa says, I can't be investigated by Parliament, I'm leaving. So that might collapse the government months down the line, unless the Concord says Parliament did its work, it did a vote, and the vote is acceptable. Parliament followed its own rules, and we can't interfere. So in which case, he's safe.
Fascinating scenario. Mpumelelo, can I ask you just to talk to us for a moment about a name that we haven't mentioned on this call, and that is Paul Mashatile, the Deputy President of the ANC. I mean, if there was ever a time for Mashatile to have made a move on Cyril Ramaphosa, surely it was now, with the party losing 17% of its support from the 2019 election. Why is it just absolutely... Why is it just this? It doesn't seem to even be on the table that Ramaphosa should be removed and that Mashatile should replace him.
It's impossible for that to happen, not because of the allegations around Mashatile, but because it would require people like Fikile Mbalula to support such an idea, and I don't think Mbalula would support that. And secondly, the next elective conference is still a few years down the line. So it's a bit of a high-risk gamble if he were to try and do that now. So the real pressure for Ramaphosa would come at the next elective conference of the ANC, because then he would probably not want to be re-elected for the third time. And whoever then is the next person who's going to contest then would be the next person to lead government. If we follow what happened to Mbeki, what happened to Zuma, we can predict what is more likely to happen to Ramaphosa after that elective conference. Whether that person will be Mashatile is a totally different matter. It may not be him.
Yes, there's been some conspiracy theories going around. Some even made it into respectable publications this week, where Mashatile's allies are apparently crying that this GNU deal will see a opposition party deputy president replace him. Whether that will turn out to be true, we will yet see. Natasha, we are moving to the end of our session, and I want to start with you. There's a question from Andrea about the best and the worst outcome for a GNU, if it is successful, and how it could be good or bad for the country. Maybe if I can move it away from those words and say, what is a stable GNU likely to look like in your view? Not whether you like it or not, but what do you think a stable GNU would look like from what we know at this stage, from the party's initial reaction, DA coming to table with a document, the EFF leader tweeting that he won't, let me just get that tweet before I misquote him, he won't share power with the enemy. Who do you think you referred to? And the MK's first non-response to the ANC, but now willingness to meet with them. What does stability look like, Natasha?
My view on stability is that a tie-up with the DA and the IFP is probably the most stable arrangement. It's not the most popular, and the ANC structures as well as ANC alliance partners have come out very strongly against that scenario. So that might not be the scenario that emerges, but it is the most stable. The EFF, I've been following the EFF and the ANC coalition in Ekurhuleni quite closely. And the EFF has this ability to really railroad the ANC in a coalition arrangement. We're seeing that very strongly in Ekurhuleni, and we're seeing that very strongly in Johannesburg. They seem to be very strategic at outmaneuvering the ANC. We have an ANC mayor in Ekurhuleni. The coalition agreement went through a bit of a difficult period, and they appointed an ANC mayor because of the dissent inside the ANC over the fact and the failure of the AIC mayor, who was a sort of puppet mayor put in place by the EFF ANC coalition. So we now have an ANC mayor in Ekurhuleni, but the EFF is still effectively running the show. So the EFF, an EFF coalition can be very destabilizing, given their penchant for shifting the goalposts constantly, for strategically seeking to align themselves in a way to best benefit the party. I mean, that's how they're growing. We know that Julius Malema, the leader of the EFF, has admitted that the reason the EFF did so well in the last election was because of the internal dissent in the ANC party over what happened to Jacob Zuma. So they admit that they won all of those votes, and that in this election, Zuma formed his own party, and those votes went back to him. So what's clear is that the EFF's entire strategy is centered around taking advantage and picking at the ANC's internal fractures and internal dissent, and taking advantage of those to sort of propel itself forward. Whether it can do that beyond this point, we'll have to see, because this was the first time since the EFF's formation that it declined in support. So I think an EFF alliance for the ANC would be bad for stability. It would be bad for the ANC itself. It would be very divisive internally as well. So for me, a DA, IFP, ANC coalition would definitely be the most stable.
Carol, do you agree with Natasha that an ANC, DA, IFP, maybe plus one or two more parties coalition could be the most likely and stable?
I do see that as the most likely at this point, but we just don't know. I also think we should just keep in mind that stability, I know the ANC has put forward stability as sort of a primary sort of pillar of what they want to achieve through this GNU. But a voluntary GNU is actually going to be inherently unstable in many, many ways, because there are huge differences, especially on social policy, between those three parties. So it's going to be, and then as Mpumelelo was saying, you hit the ANC's elective conference, next, and then you've got another disruption in the GNU. So it's not an easy stable arrangement.
Mpumelelo, Mkhabela, you've got the last word on our call today. If you had to put money on a horse, where would your money go in terms of how this GNU formation that the president so badly wants will work out in a few days' time?
Look, to be honest, only Ramaphosa type of character is well suited to run a GNU of this nature, because he has styled himself as a very consultative person. He's a committees person. So this will be a bigger committee of diverse people. He has always wanted to have this social compact, which he failed to deliver. This is the moment where he now has a chance to build even a bigger social compact of parties of different ideological persuasions. He now has to show his skill as a negotiator. But I think the one thing, maybe the last word, one thing that I think can stand in the way of these parties is the urge to try to be different to your ideological opponents. I think that can drag a GNU backwards. So if, for example, they don't say the EFF and the DA are members of this GNU, and they persist on dealing with their differences instead of parking them on the side and focusing on where potentially there's a middle ground. So that could actually derail the establishment of the GNU. But if they were to follow the map or the outline of Ramaphosa's GNU formation, most likely all the parties can find each other, notwithstanding their differences.
Mpumelelo, Mkhabela, Carol, Paton, and Natasha Marrian, thank you very much. Thank you to the News24 viewers for watching with us and for reading what we write. It's an exciting few days ahead for us political junkies. We'll keep you updated on News24. Please stay tuned to our app, our platforms, wherever you read us. Thank you for joining us today. And have a good weekend. We'll be back soon. Goodbye.